Hi there, and welcome to the Cotswold Explorer. I'm Robin Shuckburgh, and we're exploring the wonderful region of the Cotswolds in southwest England. For the last couple of years, we've been following in the footsteps of Herbert Evans, who wrote this wonderful book, Highways and Byways in Oxford and the Cotswolds, in 1905. And you'll find Ross, Widget, Gizmo and me today in the little village of Barton on the Heath. It's a tiny place. From its name, you might expect it to be a bit windswept. Sometimes the villages on the tops of the hills in the Cotswolds are less hospitable than the ones in the valleys. This place does not feel like that. It's wonderful and peaceful. I'm almost speaking in a hushed voice because this place is just people's homes. It's wonderful. We're going to show you around. Come with me. The absence of people in the street, even in the gardens on this lovely spring day, suggests that most of the population of this little hamlet work elsewhere. That shouldn't surprise us. Barton on the Heath grew up around a substantial 18th century red brick rectory, easily visible from the village green, and a lovely late 16th century manor house, and of course the estates that went along with them. Probably all the working population of the village was involved in the local agriculture, whether that be arable or stock farming, or more likely both. These days, farming requires virtually no workforce, so inevitably the residents of the villages like this are either retired, working from home, or commute elsewhere for a living. The manor house, views of which can be gained from the village green as well as from the churchyard, is said to have been altered and restored in the early 17th century by Inigo Jones, the father of modern architecture in England and Wales, and the first to introduce the classical architecture of Rome and the Italian Renaissance to Britain. The house is laid out in the late Tudor style, with an east-west facing central building with wings on either end projecting westwards. There is little in this village to surprise us, really. It's true that it's particularly well cared for. There are no visible signs of decay or neglect, of which, even in the most celebrated of communities, you usually see a little. But in its historical residence, there lies an interesting tale. Some of you will remember our mentioning whilst travelling the towns and villages of the western escarpment of the Cotswolds, the Cotswold Olympics. Games of a strange and unique kind, which have taken place on and off in the hills just outside Painswick since the beginning of the 17th century. They were conceived by an extraordinary lawyer called Robert Dover, who lived in this parish and was celebrated at the time for his remarkable and unusual habit of persuading his clients to compromise and avoid litigation. A later resident was Olivia Wilmot, who spent much of her childhood under the care of her uncle, Dr. James Wilmot, rector of Barton, and was married here in 1791 to J. Serres, from whom she separated in 1804. She achieved some fame as an artist, becoming landscape painter to the Prince of Wales, and more notoriety as claiming to be Princess Olive, daughter of the Duke of Cumberland, a descent less substantial than that of Christopher Sly in the prologue to Shakespeare's Taming of the Shrew. Aficionados amongst you will remember the prank played on Sly by the local lord, who had the drunken Sly's insensible body carried into his home, so that when he awoke they could persuade him he was himself a lord. Sly says in bewilderment as he woke up, "What? Would you make me mad? Am I not Christopher Sly, old Sly's son of Barton Heath? By birth a pedlar, by education a card maker, by transmutation a beer herd, and now by profession a tinker? Ask Miriam Hackett, the fat alewife of Winkert, if she knew me not." The small but beautiful church just south of the manor house is early 12th century in date, with alterations as usual through the centuries. It's dedicated to St. Lawrence, a man celebrated as one of Rome's most important martyrs. He was thought to have been roasted on a gridiron in 258 AD, but it's more likely that he was beheaded in that year and venerated since the 4th century. On the north wall of the church is a window showing some of the gridiron symbol of St. Lawrence. This was probably moved from the east window above the altar, which was replaced in the early 14th century with what you see today. The small chapel on the south side, attached to the modern porch, was also built in the 14th century, some 100 years after the addition of the simple but beautiful little tower. It's only just over 5 foot square, in 3 stages, each showing signs of repair over the years, and topped by a saddleback roof with stone tiles. It contains 2 bells, dated 1672 and 1740, bearing the names John Kerry and Henry Bagley, respectively. There's a glorious simplicity about this church that stands it a little apart from so many of the more sophisticated buildings we're accustomed to. The 15th century font is octagonal with carved side panels and a plain stem, and the pulpit is again simple in design and probably made up of rescued panelling. There's a holy water stoop, well preserved, and several examples of primitive early carving on the stone arches. One in particular is thought by some to represent a pig, whilst others insist it's a hare. On the village green, there is a well house erected by the Bird family as a monument to R.W.M. Bird. There is speculation that it's modelled on, or perhaps a re-erection of, a late 17th or early 18th century well house, and it carries 2 inscriptions on the drum supporting the urn. This fountain is presented to the parish of Barton on the Heath by Major and Mrs. R.W. Bird in memory of their eldest son, R.W.M. Bird, who died at Barton House on the 12th of July 1874. Loved in life, he lives in loving memory when dead. And around the lion's head spout to the drinking trough is inscribed, "Whosoever will let him take the water of life freely." A quote from Revelations chapter 22, verse 17. Owing to the weathering, the 2 original inscriptions are no longer visible, and 2 matching stone plaques have been fitted to the vertical faces of the plinth, either side of the drinking trough, replicating the inscriptions. They were put there in 2007. It's a lovely, peaceful place to sit in the shade, under the oak tree that's the only survivor of several planted at the same time as the construction of the memorial. But don't let the inevitable sense of tranquility dissuade you from wandering this little village, looking at the delightful cottages with extremely little of the 21st century to spoil your pleasure, and look at the interesting 3-dimensional aerial view of the village, sculpted in clay by presumably local artist Liz Cayley to celebrate the turn of the millennium, and attached to what we assume was once the local school building. This village has been an absolute joy. I hope you've enjoyed our little tour around this sleepy place of Barton on the Heath. It's absolutely classic Cotswolds. We've had a lovely time here. It's very quiet. It's an absolute perfect classic hidden gem. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It really helps us if you do. You can find us on all the normal platforms. Look at our website, thecotswoldexplorer.co.uk, where you will find all the details about our past activities. And we look forward to seeing you again very soon, somewhere else in the Cotswolds.